In the mid-80s, the formula for making it big in hard rock music was pretty straightforward. You needed a singer who could grab the crowd and hit those high notes. You needed a guitar player who could melt faces during the solo, and you needed to have great songs. Dokken, they had all three. You had Don Dokken out front, you had George Lynch on guitar, and great songs. So on paper, one of the deadliest pairings of the whole decade with Dokken and Lynch. Together they built platinum selling machine. Their 1985 album, Under Lock and Key, it broke them wide open, and their 1987 record, Back for the Attack, that was their real masterpiece. But behind the music, there was no brotherhood. There was actually a war. Don Dokken and George Lynch infamously hated each other. Not the normal kind of band tension, a deep personal hatred that almost felt sick. And it wasn't just about the music. Don saw the band as his. I mean, it had his name on it, right? And he wanted tight, radio-friendly, and radio-ready hooks. Now, George Lynch felt boxed in. He wanted to push the music in a heavier, darker, and harder direction. So you had two men, one band, and zero trust. So when they walked into the studio, that hate didn't just cause fights, it froze the whole production. And it burned through cash as well. So while making these albums, the two men, they refused to be in the same room together. So if George was in the studio tracking, Don was out. He was gone. If Don was in there to sing, George left the building. The producers, Neil Kernon and Michael Wagener, they stopped being recording guys. They became referees, babysitters, peacekeepers, whatever the hell you want to call them. They were doing double time or triple duty in some cases. Now, since the band couldn't work out the songs together like a normal group of adults, the studio clock just ran twice as long. They were paying top dollar for the best studios in Los Angeles just so they didn't have to look at each other. So when Don was gone, George Lynch would lock himself in the studio and chase the perfect guitar sound for hours. He was obsessed with his gear. He hauled in his old 1968 Marshall Plexi amps modified by Lee Jackson. He was hunting for the exact magic in the tone. He plugged in his custom ESP Kamikaze and Tiger guitars, and he pushed the front of those amps with a tube screamer to get a sharp, cutting, high-gain sound. But Lynch didn't just use that studio time to get a great tone. He also used it to sabotage his own lead singer. Because they weren't talking, Lynch would write rhythm parts and chord progressions that were almost impossible for Don to sing easily over. I mean, he filled every inch of the tape with huge stacked guitars. He really didn't leave much room for the vocals at all. So when Don Dokken showed up to the studio to sing, he found a brick wall of guitars, and he just had to scream over them to be heard. The producers, unfortunately, they were stuck in the middle. They'd turn the guitars down so the vocals could come through, and then they'd brace for the screaming match when George Lynch would come back in and he heard his tracks had been lowered. Somehow, against all odds, it worked. Back for the Attack, that went platinum. And then came the biggest break of their lives, 1988's Monsters of Rock tour. As most of you all know, this was a traveling stadium festival. We had Van Halen as the main headliner. Then you had the Scorpions, then Dokken, and below them you had Metallica and Kingdom Come, two bands that at the time people hadn't fully figured out yet. So stop and think of that for a minute. Dokken was billed above Metallica. Metallica hadn't blown up just yet, and Justice for All had just come out, so they hadn't blown the doors wide open. At that time, in '88, Dokken was the bigger name. The young, hungry band of Metallica, they were still climbing. And in a couple of years, that order would flip completely. Nobody knew it at the time. You could kind of feel it coming, but this was the changing of the guard. And here's where the story turns dark. Dokken should have been on top of the world. Instead, the whole thing was already dead. Lynch later said that the band was told before the tour even started that Don was planning to break it up. So they went out and played the biggest shows of their careers knowing it was already over. George Lynch said he was depressed and beaten down the entire time. He was basically a dead man walking. I mean, it got so bad that even the headliner noticed. George later remembered Eddie Van Halen pulling him aside and asking him flat out, "What the hell is wrong with you?" I mean, the misery showed up on stage too. At one show, fans walked away saying Dokken's set was short and flat. The hate had finally bled into the music itself, and it had turned physical as well. Just 2 months before that tour started back in March of '88 in London, Dokken was opening for AC/DC for some shows there, and Dokken and Lynch snapped in the back of the limo. George Lynch grabbed Don and put him in a headlock and started swinging at him. Security had to pull them apart, and they were still throwing threats at each other when they pulled up to the show. Offstage during the Monsters of Rock tour in '88, nothing had really changed. Separate tour buses, separate dressing rooms. They only talked through lawyers and their managers. I mean, they were spending their own money just to keep a wall between themselves. But here's the cruelest part of the whole Dokken saga. The thing that finally blew it all up wasn't the hate. It was the money. The band's record deal was up, and they held all the cards. They were a platinum-selling band coming off a stadium tour. This was the moment every band dreams of, the new deal, the huge payday, the contract that sets you up for life. Motley Crue got it. Van Halen got it. For years, Dokken had split everything 4 ways, even shares among band members. That was the agreement. But according to Lynch, when the big payday finally showed up, Don tried to grab control of it for himself. Now, Don tells it differently. He blames the drugs and George's ego. Either way, the band of brothers that built the whole machine fell apart at the exact moment when it was supposed to cash in. So in March 1989, that classic Dokken lineup, they were finished. They didn't break up because the record stopped selling. The label didn't drop them. MTV didn't stop playing them. They blew up a multi-million-dollar empire on purpose. Part of it was the money and the control, and part of it was simple. They just couldn't stand to be near each other for one more day. That hate ran so deep that walking away from the biggest payday of their lives felt easier than playing one more song together. And of course, here's the part that makes it bigger than just one band. George Lynch said it best. That tour, the Monsters of Rock tour, was the end of an era. The last giant traveling rock and roll, hard rock show. I don't count Lollapalooza because that was alternative and grunge. So within a few years, the whole world that made Dokken huge was gone. And that's what replaced it. The grunge, the Lollapalooza, all that 90s stuff. The hair, the stadiums, the excess, all of it was swept away. So Dokken didn't just burn down their own house. They were standing right at the finish line of an entire age of rock. And they couldn't even cross it together and enjoy it, enjoy the fruits of their labor. So if you enjoy stories like this and you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, please hit the subscribe button and the like button, because there's more stories like this coming in the future. Now, I've also written a couple of books on rock and roll history, and if you're into music history from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you can check those out. The links are in the Amazon, for the Amazon links are in the description box below, and I'll see you in the next one.